Good afternoon and welcome to all of you to this second donut organized by the AIIC PRIMS. For this second bite-size online sweet donut or online session, we are broadcasting live on the AIIC social media channels, and I'd like to apologize ahead of time for any technical glitch we might have. I hope there won't be any dogs barking or cats sitting in front of the camera. For this second online session, we've decided to open the doors of PRIMS to colleagues around the world who are not members of AIIC yet, and also to players of the mice industry. But we will talk about this in a minute. Before, let me introduce myself. My name is Raffaella Marchese. I'm speaking from Milan in Italy. Today here in Milan is a national holiday. In Italy is a national holiday. We have a gorgeous day, and it feels like we are in Sicily. I don't know what's happening to the world climate. I'm the coordinator of the PRIMS Standing Committee, and before I introduce today's agenda and also today's speaker, I'd like to take you to a journey across the globe and introduce you the other members of the Standing Committee of PRIMS. So let's go to Argentina with Martín Barrera. Welcome, Martín.
Hello, thank you, Raffaella. Good morning, everyone. I am Martín Barrer. I am a member of the Standing Committee of PRIMS, and I am based in Buenos Aires, where it is sunny but rather cold. It is winter, almost winter here. We are delighted to have this interaction with you in our first donut that is open to the general public. Please stay in touch and post your comments on Facebook and YouTube channels that we have made available. It will be very interesting to see your opinions, but remember that if you want to have your name displayed, you have to grant permission to StreamYard. That is the streaming solution that we are using currently for this donut. So now over to you, Raffaella.
Thank you, Martín. And from Argentina, let's go now to Germany, where we have Manuela Ville. Welcome, Manuela.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to everyone. And I'm really looking forward to today's session here. I'm sure we'll all be learning a lot more about the meeting and conference industry and where it is going now, especially after the sudden interruption of our activities almost everywhere due to COVID-19. And I'm sure the conversation with our guests will give us some fascinating insights here. And by the way, if you're interested in staying in touch with us and be informed about future remote or in-person events, please leave your details by filling in the form. You will see a link below in the info section of the streaming. And please only use this if you are not a member of AIIC. Members of AIIC can use the email prims-communications@aiic.net. Drop us a line and I will add you to our Friends of PRIMS mailing list. Back over to you, Raffaella.
Thank you, Manuela. And let's go now to the Netherlands, where we have Maria Grazia Grossi. Welcome, Maria Grazia.
Hi, thank you, Raffaella, and good afternoon, everybody. Martin told you that you're welcome to post your live comments on Facebook and on YouTube. But if you want to ask questions and to answer our polls, you are kindly asked to use Slido, S-L-I-D-O. So go to slido.com, and you don't need to download the Slido app. For those of you who are not familiar with Slido, you just go to Slido webpage. It's very easy. It was easy even for me. You go there and you can easily enter the code of our event. The code is PRIMS Donut 2. And I keep repeating, go to the web page now because there is a poll coming up very soon. So you need to be prepared because I have a very important poll for you. So you go to the slido.com and you enter the code. The code is PRIMS Donut 2, and you will be directed to a page. On top of the page, there are two tabs, Q&A and polls. You use Q&A to write your answer, and please don't forget your name. So to write your question, and you use the polls to answer the polls. And after all my chatting and talking, I was hoping to give you time to go to the web page. Now I have the poll for you. People who have been in our first donut already imagine what sort of question I'm going to ask. Do you have a donut with you? A donut, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and most of all, a donut. Do you have a donut with you? And I just learned a very interesting piece of information. One of our speakers didn't have time to buy a donut or to bake one, because some people are baking donuts. She's wearing donut socks. Isn't it wonderful? I love you, Jessie, for this. It's wonderful. She sent a picture of her donut socks. So I'm talking to give you time to vote, because we have a delay with the streaming. And during the first donut, we had 32% of respondents who were ready with a donut that you can eat while you're listening to us. We don't see you anyway. Or you wait it and it will be your treat at the end of our conversation. At the moment, I think we have a good number of answers. It's 65%. It's wonderful. More than the double. Great. 66. We want to reach 100% next time. Rafa, do you have a donut?
Yes, I have it. It's right here. I'm looking forward to having it at the end of this presentation. Thank you very much, Maria Grazia. And
bye.
Bye. From the Netherlands, we know, well, actually, I have a picture for you. I want to show you the rest of the standing committee. It's a truly international standing committee. And, you know, you have Sharona Wolkowitz from Costa Rica, San Jose. You have Sergio Alvarez Rubio, who's based in France. You have Felix Odeig, who's based in Spain, Claudia Ricci, based in Italy, Veronica Cioni, based in the Netherlands. So as I said before, it's a truly international team. But now, enough joking, and let's go to business. Well, first of all, what about AIIC and what about PRIMS, for those of you who are not familiar with the AIIC alphabet soup, as we call it? Well, AIIC is the International Association of Conference Interpreters. We have well beyond 3,000 members across the globe, covering almost any language combination. PRIMS is a part of it. It's a group within AIIC, and it includes conference interpreters who serve the private market, who work for the private market, which means we work for small, medium, large size corporations. We work for think tanks. We work for trade unions. We work for NGOs. We work for trade association, anyone on the private market needing our services. The PRIMS people usually meet twice a year. We meet in a different city in the world. We do it in person, and we usually have simultaneous interpretation from and to at least 2 languages. And I'm really sorry that today we weren't able to offer this service for technical reasons, because we were not 100% confident with the RSI solutions that are currently available. So as I said, we usually meet in person twice a year. And of course, for obvious reasons that I don't have to spell out, we had to move online. And so we decided to keep it very short, to meet at least once a month with a short version of our meeting, short and sweet, hence the donut. So we had to move online, but nevertheless, you know, COVID was a stark reminder that we're not alone in this business. We're not alone in this industry. There is our whole army of professionals with their unique features, with their unique qualities and skills, and they all contribute to the success of our common customers. So we thought it was a shame that we rarely have an opportunity to sit down at the same table to discuss common issues, common problems, and maybe even to forge common strategies to design the industry the way we want it. And this is precisely today's aim. We want to sit down, have a conversation, try and understand what's the future of the conference industry is going to be, and try and see whether there is a chance for us working together to shape our own future. So as I said, we're not alone in this, and we have invited 3 fantastic panelists. And again, this will take us across the world. We will start with Danielle Ward. She is the founder of Reward, and she will take us to the unusual world of sustainable events. Then we will go to the United States, where we have Jessie States. She's the director of MPI International. Welcome, Jessie. And Jessie will give us the American point of view. We will see whether things are panning out differently in the United States compared to what's happening here in Europe. And then we will go back to the UK, where we have Martin Fullard. Martin, welcome. Martin is the editor of Conference News, Mass Media. Martin, you have been around in this industry for quite a bit, I think. And I guess you have seen different trends coming and going, fashions waxing and waning. But I think the current situation is quite unprecedented. And I'm really interested to see to understand how you see things developing. So I now leave the screen to you, Martin. Off you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Raffaella, and thank you to everyone joining us today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So just to reiterate exactly who I am, my name is Martin Fullard. I'm the editor of Conference News magazine and also the editorial director at Mass Media. Mass Media is a UK-based events, independent events company. We run a load of different events as well, such as International Confex, which takes place in London every February. Some of you may be familiar with that. So at Mass Media, we've got 5 magazines, which I have a hand in, which gives me a good overview of the industry at large. So beyond editing Conference News myself, there is Exhibition News, which is UK-centric, Exhibition World, Conference and Meetings World, and Access All Areas, which tackles the outdoor events industry, including music festivals and sporting events and that sort of thing. So I've been invited here today to give just a short 10-minute overview, really, of where we are. So if I could have the next slide, please. I've just got a quick poll for you, and this is really only for my anecdotal evidence afterwards. I'd like to ask you all if you feel threatened by event technology or whether you think it will benefit the conference and meetings industry. So this is taking place on Slido, so visit slido.com. The code you need, PRIMSDonut2. Pop it in there. I'm keen to know what it is. I'm going to keep that open for the duration of the session, and I'll have a look at the result at the end. So where are we now as an industry? Now, the events industry, I guess you could say, has entered a holding pattern. Time seems to be moving at a rapid pace, yet it also feels so slow because we're no clearer today on what the future might look like. It seems we're all waiting for our daily updates on the latest figures of reported COVID-19 cases, and it's all a bit morbid. And is that curve starting to flatten off? I think it's fair to say right now there is light at the end of the tunnel, but hope is not a strategy, but it is all we seem to have at this precise moment. But we must be aware, even as the lights at the end of the tunnel begin to shine, a second spike is still a possibility. And that's something I think, we've got to all keep an eye on. So we've got the correct slide on the screen, which is great. I wanted to just quickly touch on identity and the return of events. Who is leading the return? Where in the world can you look to where the industry's rebirth is taking place? So I just wanted to quickly touch on identity, or a lack of identity for the events industry. It's been a key issue for us throughout this crisis, perhaps in some countries more than others. So as I'm from the UK, it's an obvious example. For years, the events industry has never really been fully appreciated for its contributions to the UK economy. Just for the record, in the UK alone, conferences, meetings and exhibitions is worth about £70 billion to the UK economy every year. The problem is, what we don't have is a government, what we call standard industrial classification code, which means that the government can't accurately monitor and measure the true value. And because we don't have this special industry code, we get ignored for lots of things. And that's certainly something a lot of events businesses have been feeling over the last couple of months. The second problem with identity we've got is the idea that a lot of people, mainly in the public and non-events world, when you tell them you're an events manager, they think music festivals and weddings. And I think we all know that there is so much more to it than that. And I think most of the members of the AIIC as well will testify that you are a very important cog in that conference market. You're part of that events industry mold as well. It's not just about the weddings and the festivals. Then, of course, there is this issue that there are no barriers to entry, which means anyone can work in events, and it's made measuring the financial impact quite hard indeed. And I kind of like to say that events, they hide in plain sight. Content is king, and it's what people attending the event are there for. But when someone's there attending an event, they're not thinking of the how, they're thinking of the what. And this is where I think that the events industry, I think you'll all agree, event professionals, and maybe yourselves as well, are the invisible stagehands. You've created these events, but no one ever sees who you are. So you don't get the mention on the national news and things like that. And it's caused a lot of concerns. So where can we find good examples of a country leading the way and returning to business? And I think we have to look no further than the coast of Germany. Germany's national government and the 16 states have agreed that exhibitions are now on the list of activities that are explicitly listed as possible, rather than being classed as this more ambiguous term, mass gatherings, which remain banned until the end of August, incidentally. This ruling means that trade shows can actually now run again in principle. Whether they will or not is anyone's guess, because there's a lot of intangible problems there, like who will be the first to blink. But technically, these shows can now start planning themselves again. So following China's first major exhibition taking place in the Hunan province at the beginning of May, Germany's become the second of the world's biggest three markets for exhibitions to take a big step forward in reopening this trade fair business. Okay, it's not strictly conferences, but nonetheless, it is all looking like it's going in the right direction. Now, at the same time, oh, no, sorry, I'll just go back a bit on myself there so I'll get this important thing in. The Global Association for the Exhibition Industry, UFI, has designed a specific framework which is being adopted by countries all over the world. So when trade shows now begin to run in Germany, they'll have to follow this framework. Now, I'll speak to the team at AIIC after this and we'll see if we can get the link out to you. It's a big document, but the 5 key points you can see on the screen there. When an event is running, it must be in a controlled environment, ensuring the personal safety of the personnel and the delegates, visitors, ensuring physical distancing, increase health and safety measures, and implement crowd control and encourage and enforce these measures. So it's an interestingly detailed document, and I do urge everyone to give it a read, and I can provide a link to that later on. If I could have the next slide on the screen, please. I want to turn my attention now to hybrid events and quality. So COVID-19 has shone a spotlight on event strategies, and perhaps anecdotally, it's apparent that a lot of digital events, I think, have been something of an afterthought for a lot of companies and people. For starters, I think we can't even agree on the name. Some people call them digital events, some people virtual events. Hybrid, I think, is the word we're going to be using more mainstream in the future. So when we were told a few months ago that we were going into lockdown and events would no longer run, it exposed that a lot of corporates and perhaps associations too didn't have proper digital event strategies. Now, we have to be clear on this. You can't just flick a switch and take your live event online to an online platform. There are many different things to consider. This includes perhaps the duration of a content session and how you present. It is a completely different environment, and that does need to be considered. Now, the other issue that's on the horizon, and it's a bit of a scary one for a lot of people, is budgets. Now, for an example, take before a company would spend, thousands of euro or dollars of their marketing budgets to facilitate a live event. Maybe we should call them experiences. And for argument's sake, let's say this one event would attract 500 people. Now, with this extra online tool that they've been forced to discover, they can increase their audience engagement. And maybe now they might get 1,000. And the biggest news here is that apparently that doesn't cost much more money. And that's where we're going to find a problem. The problem is that these digital events right now, in most cases, are a bit of a patchwork. They've been put together hurriedly because people haven't yet worked out the best way of making them work. And it's also important to remember right now, as far as the high engagement figures are concerned, is that you have a captive audience. People are forced in their homes. They are forced to stay here. So they actually have the time and the wherewithal to actually attend these events. So perhaps this idea of increased engagement is more only really a sign of the times and where we are. The fact is that when we return to live events and they're running again, will that engagement still be high? It remains to be seen. The fact is that regardless, going forward, events in the future are going to have to be rooted in live form. The hub will need to be a live experience somewhere out there in the world. And through live streaming and Q&A, the event, I guess, will almost feel like a bit of a TV show. And that brings us to the quality aspect. So in the UK, we have many agencies and AV and production companies. Now, sadly, as far as their businesses are concerned, I think some of them have their heads in the sand, waiting for a return to normal. I mean, really, what does normal look like now? However, we are hearing of some agencies and some AV companies who are actually starting to build their own virtual studios, their own virtual venues, meaning that the quality of this event delivery is far greater than just having the host sitting in his or her spare in kitchen, or where I am in my spare bedroom. But on top of that, when live events return, more affordable packages will be available too, combining the studio with the live audience. And don't forget, physical distancing, social distancing, that's not going to be around forever. So as an aside, if you're an interpreter, this is a good opportunity for you to locate these agencies, find these production companies, and tell them what you need to be able to do your job properly in this virtual venue or virtual studio capacity. You have to fight for the right equipment, I suppose. Could I have the next slide, please? I just want to now turn our attention quickly to travel. And as I noted before, businesses are turning to event agencies for help in running effective digital events and content. But what does it mean for the future of events when we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis? Well, I think we're all going to be rushing to the first live event we can find when we're allowed out of our homes. The issue events industry's carbon footprint will raise its head pretty quickly. So are we on a collision course with climate change as a concept? For those dipping in here from outside the events industry, I can assure you, and I know that Danielle will be elaborating on this later, sustainability has been top of the events industry agenda for at least the last 3 or 4 years. It really, well, we have made phenomenal progress when it comes to things like food waste, promoting plant-based catering options, less printed material, the abolishment of single-use plastic, and so much more besides. However, moving people around and traveling, often in large numbers, is an inescapable fact, and that's one of the big issues we've always had to contend with. Now, it's not unreasonable to think that at some point, this pandemic is an example of us getting by with digital events and that we don't need as many live events in the future. And this is important, so let us be clear about this. Technology can complement an event. It can't replace it. If anything, this crisis has shown us not only how important live events are to people and business, but also how much I think we take them for granted. People will still need to move around, and I'm confident that the industry's carbon footprint can be managed sustainably. Live is always going to be important. So if I could have the next slide, please. Every event exists to fulfill an objective, and that will never change. What will change is that the expectation of quality will increase. And this is potentially good news for interpreters, since the human translation is far superior to the technology version. And I think that's a really important point that I want everyone to understand. So I'm going to just wrap it up very shortly now. I just want to have a quick look at the poll. And according to the poll results, 40% of you do not feel threatened by event technology. 34% of you are unsure, and 27 of you actually do feel threatened by event technology. And that's quite an interesting set of results. So I'm going to use that anecdotally in my next presentation. But I won't talk for hours because I think I could. We've only touched on the surface. And now I think I'd like to bring Jessie into the conversation. If we could have Jessie on the screen.
Hi.
Jessie. Right, well, I'm going to now hand the screen over to you. Everyone, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Like I say, we only touched on the top of it, but now I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Jessie. Over to you.
Thank you so much. We'll just wait as the presentation loads. But my name is Jessie States. I'm the director of the MPI Academy at Meeting Professionals International. MPI is the largest global community of meeting professionals in the world. We have 17,000 members globally. We have a dozen chapters in Europe. We have a couple of chapters in Asia and South America. And then we have our North American and our Canadian chapters as well. So a huge global association for people that influence the meeting and event industry, those who plan and those who supply into it. And I'm going to discuss today some of the trends that we're seeing in our ongoing research into how the current crisis is impacting the meeting and event industry and how meeting professionals are proactively.
Sorry, I think you should move a little bit your mic because we hear some funny noises. Like just a bit more far from your mouth.
Sure, is this better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, good. So just to talk about what's happening right now globally in the meeting and event sector and how we can continue to work through that. So the next slide, I'll show you what it currently looks like in the meeting and event sector. These are these are the current conditions. We are not hosting live in-person meetings. There are no audiences to interpret to in a live setting. And looking at pictures like this remind me why pictures of the PRIMS standing committee are so important for us to remember what it was like when we were able to get together to really create and solve solutions and find solutions together. So the next slide is going to be my short agenda for what we're going to talk about today. And that is our MPI Recovery Index. We surveyed meeting professionals and also meeting destinations. It's called our DMO Recovery Index. We did that in late April so that we can understand better what recovery looks like for our industry. But also, we're continuing to do that research where every couple of weeks we are surveying our audience to see when that recovery is likely going to happen using the lens of what we know today, because tomorrow things could change. Then we're going to talk a little bit about virtual events and how meeting professionals have made the pivot to virtual when necessary. And then also some health and safety regulations that are coming out of this current crisis. I know that we already talked about the UFI framework. There is also the Event Safety Alliance in Canada and some other frameworks that are coming as well. So those are the things that we'll be talking about in the next 10 minutes. So let's start with that recovery index. And if we can take a look at the first slide, I'll show you what it looks like overall. But also before we do take a look at that slide, or as we take a look at that slide, I want you to answer the question in Slido, which is already up. The question is, how do you anticipate, or when do you anticipate that recovery to happen? So when do you anticipate MICE business will begin to recover? When we asked this in late April, the large majority of those who responded to us said September is likely going to be when globally we begin to see business coming back, meetings and events business beginning to take place on a very regional level. So this isn't those big international conferences, but on a regional level, starting to see the event industry come back. And I see now that with 109 going 118 responses, many of those in the space today, be it yourselves or your clients, are really anticipating that the BICE business won't even begin recovery until 2021. And if we look back on that slide one more time, you'll see that that was the next answer. So those who were thinking that it's going to recover in September, and then the next best answer, or the next answer that people were really thinking about, was that it might be 2021 before we anticipate the beginning of a recovery in our industry. Now, the September number, as we continue our polling, begins to leak a little into October. So that October number continues to increase and that September number continues to go down. But we anticipate a beginning recovery in these. This is the time frame. Now, a full recovery is completely different. A full recovery is not anticipated. Once we go back and take a look at that slide, the full recovery, the answer is a little bit more complicated. Its Facebook status would be it's complicated. So we're really looking at a quarter one, quarter two, maybe even quarter three of next year before we fully anticipate a recovery in the meetings and event business. And when we're talking about a meetings and event business that's been impacted, we are a $1.2 trillion industry globally. That's 1.2 trillion US dollars that our industry impacts to the global economy, and that won't fully recover until late next year. So just something to really think about. I loved that we already discussed the impact in the UK, but we're looking at the global impact. This industry has a massive impact on global economies, and the fact that it probably won't fully recover for another 18 months is going to be truly devastating to some of our world's destinations and to some of our countries. So on the next slide, we will go ahead and talk through a little bit more about what that is causing to the meeting and event professionals. And you may, as an event supplier, as someone who feeds into the meetings and event industry, and is incredibly important to creating dynamic and engaging experiences for global audiences and helping diverse peoples connect, you're going to be looking at clients who are lengthening their buying window. So when we asked how is your buying window being changed by the pandemic, 30% of meeting professionals say it's much longer than it used to be. And another 21% saying it's slightly longer. So what we're truly looking at as 51% of buyers, that's meeting organizers, are saying that their buying window is changing due to this. You'll likely start to see clients looking much further out for your services due to this. And then the percent of original revenue you expect this fiscal year. Meeting professionals say they only expect 45% of their anticipated revenue related to the meeting and event business in 2020. And the workforce impact has been stark. This is global numbers again, but those planners who have either been put on leave or let go of their organizations, F is for furlough and L is for laid off. We're truly seeing that the virus is impacting global employment. So these are all things that you might have already been witnessing in the market. And we also have the data now to show how that impact and what that impact looks like. So now let's move on to a discussion of digital events, virtual events. And that'll be the next part of our conversation. So on that next slide, we'll really take a look at, there are a variety of different platforms and technologies that enable digital event or virtual event experiences. They range all the way to streaming services like the one we're using today, to fully digitized and virtual worlds where people create an avatar and experience education, roam around. This particular one that I'm showing here, Verbella, has a soccer field and a beach where you can go out on a speedboat with a client, for example. So there are a lot of different opportunities when it comes to the experience. Many meeting professionals in the short term have pivoted to digital experiences. A couple of things about that. Most meeting professionals tried to postpone their meetings. That was the first thing that they looked to do when the crisis became apparent that meetings could no longer occur. They wanted to do right by their attendees and by their partners, their destinations, their hotels, their service providers, their interpreters. In order to do that, the first effort was to postpone. Now, if a postponement could not happen because this meeting was so needed as from a business perspective at that particular moment, it was so business critical that it could not be moved, or moving that event would forelay or ensure that some kind of change couldn't happen amongst an audience, then that was when they pivoted to the solely digital experience. And so when you're taking a look at many of your meetings likely have been moved to later in the year before they were moved into a digital environment. It was only moved into a digital environment when it became clear that the meeting could no longer occur, that the business impacts of that meeting were too important. And so that's when we start to look at the virtual environments, and there are a variety of different types of virtual events. All the way from the currently, we are hosting a virtual experience. That's what the PRIMS standing committee is doing with its donut series. This is a digital event, so you can look at the different ways in which you can host a digital experience. That could be a webinar, it could be a virtual show, it could be a webcast. It could be a virtual world like the one I'm showing here, or some kind of a hybrid of those different things. And there are a variety of platforms out there that meeting professionals can use to bring people together in a digital space. In order to determine what type of virtual event they want to host, they take a look at their objectives, they take a look at the behavior change that they need out of their audience, and they use that as a lens to determine what the best type of virtual event is going to be and what the right platform is for that virtual experience. As we continue to look at digital experiences, though, there is when the technology is right, when we get the technology correct on the interpretation side, it's going to be a very exciting moment for meeting and event professionals, because when we open up digital experiences, we open up the world. And while meeting face to face continues to be extremely important, as we look to bring more and more people together from all over the world, just like we're doing today, where there are people who are watching and engaging in this stream from all over the world. As we continue to do that, interpretation is going to become increasingly important to connect everyone and to ensure that there is understanding across communities and across diverse audiences, and that's when interpretation becomes so critical, so that all people who are coming in from all over the world are able to communicate with each other, connect, and engage. And then finally, I thought the last thing I just wanted to touch on as we look to move back into experiences is health and safety, and how that impacts what meetings and events look like on a day-to-day basis. And so these are some of the things that your event professionals are going to be considering. These are the things that are most important to them as they look to bring meetings back: venue sanitation protocols, destination crisis plans, hand sanitization stations. When it comes to interpretation, the cleanliness of audiovisual equipment is coming to a forefront. Meal distribution options, all of those things incredibly important. And we will look at the considerations for meetings and events. We're looking at on-site registration, touch and low touch solutions for ticketing, identification, check-in, payment, virtual queuing, maybe staggering the start times of sessions so that they aren't all happening at once. People can arrive not all at once, not all at the same time. Regular sanitization, electrostatic spraying for cleaning, conference health training and tools, not only for staff members and our providers like our interpreters, but also for health training and tools for our attendees. Rules and expectations, whether or not we need to have health checks on site at our venues, and ensuring that we're documenting everything, at least in the US, and this doesn't always translate to international audiences, to limit liability and litigation. Then you're talking about distancing in education sessions. And while the current physical distancing, once this crisis is over, once there is a cure, or once there is a good treatment for the virus, there will be a relaxation of distancing, but it may not be fully relaxed. So we're looking at post-crisis still having some distancing a little bit more than we've had in the past. But currently, the 6 feet is reducing classroom sizes by up to 2/3. So you're looking at a room that could once host 2,000 people, now only hosting 650 people, for example. So that 6 feet of space, or 2 meters of space, is something that meeting professionals are looking at. Room layout and traffic flow within spaces, cleaning guidelines, amplification and how that works. How do we get the audience's voice amplified in a safe way for asking questions and having group discussions, movement and activities, and how that all works. And then when we're talking about breaks and networking, we're looking at the reduction or the elimination of buffet experiences. This is entirely serviced break and meal functions, spacing guidelines, what signage needs to look like, traffic flow, hand washing stations, the 6 feet or 2 meter standard. When you amplify that out, that's 36 square feet per person, or 4 square meters per person. And then how do we help people to remember to distance themselves? Is that gaffing tape, signage? How does that work? And then meals, obviously cafeteria style instead of the buffet service styles, guidelines for food service that come out of the food and beverage restaurant industry, like hand washing, sanitization, masks and gloves, plates placed on counters rather than handed directly to people. These are all things that meeting professionals are talking about right now. Physical distancing, staggering those meals perhaps, and removing something that is long a tradition in our industry, which is the family style services. One last note on health and safety, really, if we'll go to the next slide, is really this interest in wellness was happening before the coronavirus started. This interest from meeting professionals in ensuring the health and wellness of people on site or at events. It's just kind of changed the conversation a little bit, but it was already a conversation that was being had. 79% of meeting professionals say that they are interested in ensuring the health and wellness of attendees, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. And where is that interest truly coming from? Well, it's coming from audiences. 50% said the interest in health and wellness is coming from my attendees or my prospective attendees. They want to know what influence, what resources we are putting into health and wellness for meetings and events. So those are just some of the trends that we're seeing right now in the market, and I look forward to the Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Jessie. That was really insightful. Some really interesting topics there. We look forward to a little Q&A about that in about 15 minutes' time. So thank you, Jessie. I'd now like to introduce to the virtual stage Daniela, who is now going to take us through the sustainability angle of events going forward. Danielle, over to you.
Super. Thank you, Martin. And thank you, Rafaela, and everyone at the AAIC for inviting me. So just to give you a quick introduction as to who I am. My name is Danielle Ward, and I'm the founder of Reward Events. I've worked in corporate events for the last 10 years, mainly in financial services, and I was becoming increasingly frustrated with doing events for events' sake. You know, we would do thousands of events every year, trade shows, exhibitions, corporate hospitality, you know, the whole spectrum. So I was becoming increasingly frustrated with doing events for events' sake, but also with the amount of single-use items that were being used and ultimately just being thrown away. So I decided, took the leap and set up on my own at the back end of last year, and that's when Reward was born. So Reward is a sustainable event management company, and we look at everything from the end-to-end event management, as well as sustainable event consultancy, and also helping clients find, you know, the perfect suppliers and the perfect venues that also have sustainability at the core of what they do. I'm a member of a number of sustainable event partnerships and alliances, you know, a global network of event ambassadors that are really trying to drive that change in the industry. And the strategy of my events is really built on the foundations that have been sort of laid out in the Sustainable Development Goal framework, which I'll come on to in a second. But ultimately, you know, the whole premise behind Reward is to create memorable experiences with purpose and style. You know, you can still have that, but that reduce the negative impacts to the environment and also drive that positive social change. So if I can just go to the next slide. When I was initially thinking about setting up Reward, I was keen to look at, what else is out there in terms of messaging and in terms of content, and everything seemed to point to that reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, which, absolutely is still valid today. But as you can see from the slide, there's more than 3 R's. You can start thinking about what is it that we can refuse to use? What should we be repurposing? We really need to get away from that single-use mindset. And how can we start to be more responsible with our event planning? So Reward sort of takes all of these elements into play, and it's about reflecting on that event management process, and rethinking the impact that our events have, both on a positive and a negative perspective, and reimagining, what our events could look like. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So the key to this really is, as I say, sustainability isn't about compromise. It's about making better, more informed and responsible choices. So you can still have those amazing events just without the bad bits, as I like to call them. We all love events and we've desperately missed them over the last 10, 11, 12 weeks, wherever we are now. And, they're essential for connecting people. They're essential for, educating, inspiring new ideas and really driving business. And if the last 12 weeks or so of lockdown has shown, we all desperately need that human face-to-face contact. But as we know, events do have a dark side. They're responsible for contributing on a global level over 5 billion tonnes to landfill, and over 4 billion tonnes of CO2 emissions come from the event industry as well. So we know that events, by their very nature, are temporary. It often feels as an event manager, by the time you've set up an event, it's time to pack down again and, on to the next one. So they are very temporary. They are a moment in time, but the waste they create, has a long-standing, much more permanent effect. So we're going to do a poll shortly. So get your phones ready to get your thoughts on this, because there is obviously another way. So what on earth am I talking about with regards to sustainability? What even is a sustainable event? I'm really keen to see what your thoughts are on this. So if we can go to the poll, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. So slido.com, Prim's Donut 2 is the event code, as you know. So sustainability, very complex subject. I often feel that, it means so many different things to so many different people, and often that can feel overwhelming, and often why people sort of don't get involved with it. So I'm really keen to, wow, fantastic, we've already got some votes coming in, really keen to sort of get your thoughts on it. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. This is sort of testament to the fact of how complex it is. Fantastic. Responsibility, a good reword there. Quality, environment coming through, future, fantastic. Yeah. Really, really good. So brilliant. So we'll just let that sort of tick through. But I think as that sort of shows, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There is no right or wrong answer. It is very complex, and I think ultimately impacts every stage and every part of, you know, society, whether it's, you know, business, you know, or your personal life. Brilliant. So I think environment and responsibility long term definitely coming through as those key trends. Super. Thank you very much. If we can just pop back to the slides. Of course, there is an official definition, there always is. So following the Brundtland report that came out in 1987, that defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. And if we think about applying that specifically to the event industry, we're looking at the process of integrating both those environmental issues as well as social responsibility into our event planning. So we want to reduce those negative impacts, but also see the opportunity, the huge opportunity that the event industry has as a platform to really drive this positive social change. You know, we really have a huge opportunity there. If we can just pop to the next slide. So fortunately, the UN back in 2016 did lay out a framework for us, which detailed all of the different elements that are central to sustainability. So there's 17 goals here, and ultimately what this is driving towards is thinking about what can we do to create a world that works for everyone. That's a definition that I think, you know, I can resonate with a little bit more. A world that works for everyone, what can we do? So I use this framework at the center of the strategy for all of my events to really help me sort of put responsible decision making at the heart of what I'm trying to do, and to really establish, you know, where I can have the biggest impact. So underneath those 17 goals, there are 169 targets and a whole plethora of indicators to track how we're performing. And of course, just to make it more complicated, they're all interlinked. But to keep it simple today, you know, largely you can think about sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals as being grouped into sort of three key themes. So the first one, which is something that I think most of you will probably resonate with, is environmental protection. Sorry, could we just pop back? Is the environmental protection. And, you know, that looks at climate change, it looks at clean energy, it's looking at, you know, water and sanitation, you know, life below water. So that's looking particularly at the war on plastic. So that's the environmental piece. We then also have social progress. So that's the people element. And you're looking there at well-being, at gender, at education, diversity. And then lastly, the last piece is around economic growth. So this is, you know, the business part, so the profitability. So thinking about, you know, how can we make sure everyone in the world has decent work opportunities, and we're driving innovation and sustainable communities. So sustainability, as I say, has become synonymous with environment, but there's a lot more to it than that. If we go to the next slide, we refer to this as the triple bottom line. So as you can see, all of the three areas, people, profit, and planet, all interlink and all have a connection with each other. And what we're striving for is that star, that sustainability star that's right in the center there. So we're going to be doing another poll shortly in a second, because I think what's really interesting is, you know, at the moment to think about how businesses are going to operate differently post-COVID-19. So whilst getting the economy up and running again is going to be paramount, there's no need, and that really shouldn't be happening independently to the other two sections that we just saw on the screen. So sustainability isn't about doing what's right for the environment, and COVID-19 recovery is not just going to be about getting the economy back on track. You know, we need to make sure we've got a tick in each of those boxes. So the poll should now be live. If you would be able to take a look and have a vote on whether you think there's going to be an increased focus on sustainability post the pandemic, or if you think it's going to be pushed to the side. So will it be prioritized or sidelined? 60%, or can we get it any higher? That's exactly where we want to see it. You know, as Martin mentioned earlier, you know, sustainability in the event industry has been a massive trend, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years, and we really were getting some traction, you know, in the last sort of 6 months, the last 6 to 9 months. And what we don't want to be doing, obviously, is going backwards. There's a huge amount of opportunity we have here. So, we've had over 200 votes and 60%. So I think if we go with the 60%, I think that summarizes. That's fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So the question really is, could this be a springboard? 60% of you are saying that sustainability should be, or you're hoping it's going to be prioritized post the pandemic. So we have a real opportunity here for real transformation in the industry towards that more sustainable future. The last 10 weeks have been incredibly challenging for everyone, and not to mention the human loss that has been experienced. But I really think there's been some real glimmers of hope and some opportunity. The air we're breathing is cleaner, we're burning less fossil fuels, there's less cars on the road, not to mention the improved sense of community and togetherness that I think everyone has felt, even if that has been from a distance. So how do we think sustainability could play a key role in driving the event industry post-lockdown? So if we can go to the next slide, I've just got 5 key areas that I think could become key focus areas in sustainability moving forward. So the first one, and I think, as Martin and Jessie have both touched on, the future absolutely is hybrid. From the start of lockdown, companies pivoted their events very quickly to virtual environments. And there's no doubt about it that our reliance on meeting virtually is not going to be going anywhere. But we will start to see people complementing this with physical in-person events. We know that vital human face-to-face contact can never be replaced and is never the same in a virtual environment, but we will start to see the digital events being complemented. So what about our, international events? With so many travel bans still in place, and there's very confusing, guidance around quarantine measures, certainly in the UK. Many people are going to be reluctant to travel for these mass global gatherings that we were used to on an international basis. So if we think about, how we could use a hybrid format, that hybrid model where you've got almost lots of mini regional physical events, but then connected on a global scale digitally. So you've got the sort of the best of both worlds, that increased global reach, but with the reduced travel and the reduced CO2 emissions and everything else that comes with it. So for me, going hybrid is a real, tick in the box for sustainability. If we go to the next slide. The next theme that I'm really passionate about is that less is most definitely more. I often was campaigning in my previous role, why are we doing these events? Is the event the right, method of marketing that we should be looking at? I think everybody tends to default to events. It's very visual, it's very physical and tangible. But, we really need to have a think about our event strategy in terms of, what are we doing this event for? What is our objective? What's our purpose? Why would anyone even want to come to the event? And really get down to the bare bones of what the purpose is behind the event. Do less, but do them really, really well. And I think this drive for quality over quantity in the event space is going to be massive moving forward. So not only will everyone be, competing to make up for lost space that we've lost a number of months this year, but they're also going to be very selective on which events they want to attend, virtually or otherwise. So it's not going to be enough to just host a Zoom meeting. As Martin was saying, there really has to be that focus on that whole customer design. And, you can't host a Zoom meeting. You can't just put a webcam up at the back of your auditorium and think you've got a tick in the box. It's a lot more complicated than that, but in the right way. We need to be thinking about designing that customer journey for the online experience in exactly the same way, if not more so, as you would do for a physical event. And that, when you think about your AV and technical team, if you've got a physical AV technical team for your physical event, then expect to have one for your digital or your virtual or hybrid event. The whole idea behind it, the whole premise is that we're delivering, sophisticated, high production value experiences that are engaging. We want customers, we want delegates to feel, engaged and part of the experience, whether they're online or offline. So we can just go to the next slide. The third topic that I wanted to cover was around, championing global diversity. And I think this is a massive, especially in the interpreting community, I think is going to be, a massive key part to this. And driving diversity has always been a huge part of sustainability. And we've said that events present that unique opportunity for sharing ideas, educating. It's a melting pot really of innovation and of learning. Pre-pandemic is something I always was striving for, to make sure we can have a hugely diverse event and make it as inclusive as possible. If you think about female speakers, for example, only 30% of all the speakers at events are female. So there's a hell of a lot of work that we need to do there to ensure that we're getting at least 50% female representation, not to mention ensuring that multiple cultures are being represented. And if you think about what makes a good event, you're looking at, you want challenging topics, you want different perspectives, you want new ideas, you want stimulating debates, and you're not going to get that if everyone, is from the same culture, speaking in the same language. You need that diversity to really make a good event. So this isn't something that's changed, and it's something that's hugely going to benefit from going to that hybrid model. And just think about, how many more people you're going to be able to reach with your event. You're not going to be limited to, well, I can only get, as Jessie said, from 2,000 people to 650 people at your event due to social distancing. I can only get 650 people, that you're no longer restricted by how many people that you can get in a room. You're now, it's endless, and that those boundaries are endless. So I already think about how many people I've connected with on an international level since we've been in lockdown, simply because I can. The barriers are no longer there. So this is going to be a huge theme that we're seeing in that move to hybrid. We can just go to the next slide. So whether it's flowers or food produce, I've always advocated a buy seasonal, buy local message to help drive that sustainability through our events. And I think, again, something we've really seen celebrated during lockdown. You're supporting local farm shops, your local community, local businesses. And I really don't want this to stop after lockdown. The last thing we want to see is a return to the old single-use disposable society. We have a huge problem with PPE at the moment, obviously massively essential and necessary. But if you think about all of that is single-use plastic gloves, plastic masks. How are they being disposed of? Who is taking responsibility for that? And there's likely to be many restrictions on shipping items from abroad, not to mention increased costs. So this is the time where we can really look at our supply chain and start thinking about, do those suppliers really align with our vision for sustainability? Are we aligned in our sort of responsible business processes, and start making some changes? What materials are they using? Where are they sourcing them from? What's happening to these materials once the event is over? Think about that circular economy, and that whole life cycle of a product, which is massively important. And that's, again, coming back to that responsibility as you, as an event manager, to think about, all of those different elements. So the last topic, as Jessie also mentioned, if we can go to the next slide, great, is an increased focus on well-being. It's always been a huge part of sustainability, and I think often it gets forgotten about. And this is going to be needed more than ever. As an event manager, we have a real duty of care, not only to our delegates, but our crew, and also, ourselves. We have to look after ourselves. Previously, this has included, ensuring your events have regular breaks, you have access to outside space, your events are happening in well-ventilated, well-lit spaces, good nourishing food. None of that changes. That's all still very much the same. But we also now have to ensure that all of the health and safety standards are being met. So that's everything from sterilisation and cleaning, to PPE, to social distancing, to temperature scanning. It has got very complex, but obviously very essential. So not only is there that, but we'll also continue, I think, to be a lot of fear surrounding COVID-19, and a lot of people are not going to feel necessarily comfortable attending events in person for a long time. So we really have to manage that carefully and sensitively. And I think having that hybrid option really massively helps here, in order to, give people the option to engage with the event at a level that they feel comfortable with. So just to wrap up, the final slide, if we could pop to that. And I love this quote, nothing should go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. And it's, it's so true. As we said, what we can't do is go backwards. It wasn't working then, and it's not going to work now. So we need to, really take this opportunity to make this change in the industry. As we said, in order to remain competitive, businesses, whatever you're doing, whatever events you're running, you're going to need to look at pivoting to this new normal. And I hate that term, but this new normal is the way that we're going. And if you're needing to change how you're doing your business anyway, why not think about how you can build sustainability in as a central part to that strategy? Really future-proof it, really make it resilient. And, for me, sustainability isn't about being perfect. It's about experimenting, looking at those 17 goals, seeing what works for you, experimenting and having a go, and just looking at things differently. So just take time to reflect on those processes, reevaluate the impact that your events are having, both positive and negative, and really start to make better, more informed, more responsible choices. And that really will help you reimagine what your next event could look like. And back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Daniela. That was really, really interesting. And like you say, yeah, we're not going back to normal because normal wasn't working. Absolutely
No.
love that. I think every 10 to 15 years globally, we're met with some recession or crisis, which just, forces businesses to evolve. And that's what we have to look at this as just another opportunity. I'd normally ask the audience to give you a round of applause there, but I'm not sure I can do that now. Very weird. Okay, so everyone, we're going into a two-part Q&A. I've got some questions here for Danielle and Jessie and Rafaela as well. And of course, we're also going to be asking some of the questions from Slido in about 15 minutes time. So if you have a burning question on your lips and you want to get it off your chest, please do use the Slido app. There are some on there at the moment, which are very highly rated. Oh my goodness, it's going to be very competitive. We'll get to that shortly. Rafaela, if I could start with you, please. Really, what do you think were your key takeaways from Jessie and Daniela's presentation there? And I guess if I'm going to load the question for you a bit, this issue of global diversity can really only happen through multilingualism, which is right up your street, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So many of the things both Jessie and Danielle resonates with what we think as AIIC, as an association of conference interpreters. But really, global diversity is what really struck my attention because, in my opinion, global diversity, which also means cultural diversity, can only happen through language diversity, multilingualism, as we say. There are many theories, for example, that have investigated the link that exists between languages and thoughts. The question would be, do you weigh the world you see it? I mean, do you see the world the way you see it because of the language you speak, or do you see the world differently depending on the language you learned when you were a baby? It's a really fascinating debate, in my opinion, and it's particularly fascinating for people like all of us who are interpreters and for whom languages are second nature. But there is a scholar at the Stanford University. Her name is Lara Borotsky, and she wrote that when you learn a new language, you're not merely learning just a different way of speaking, you're also learning a new way of looking at the world. And this is fascinating. And this proves, in my opinion, that really, if we are striving for global and cultural diversity, we have to make sure that people are able to speak their language and therefore they can speak their minds differently. And we should also bear in mind that when you attend a conference and speak a language which is not your native language, as I'm doing right now, actually, you end up saying the things you can say rather than the things you would like to say. So I really think that if the MICE industry is moving towards this new phenomenon of global diversity and cultural diversity, we should make our best to make it possible to offer people the possibility of speaking their own language and offering high quality interpretation services. I don't know what our speakers think about it, but from their presentations, I think they would agree with me.
Well, absolutely. And I think that takes me onto my second question, which I'm going to aim towards you, Danielle. So Rafael has just touched on this concept of language diversity. So considering people are likely going to travel less after this pandemic, could this concept actually become a key component in sustainable events?
Massively. And, I am ashamed to say that until, I spoke to Rafaela about the interpretation, the interpreter's world, I didn't even think about, that the element of language and how important that is to driving a diverse and inclusive event. That's ultimately what we're driving for. But I think, that it's a huge part of sustainability, and that hybrid event model, really gives that increase and that drives that accessibility. You know, events, as we said, you know, before you were limited to how many people you could get in the room. You're now, it's boundless. You know, you can go everywhere with it. So there's no barriers to entry. So, you know, as Rafaela said, you know, how fantastic for a speaker to be able to speak in their native language, and for delegates to be able to, you know, understand and listen, ask questions, engage also in their native language. You know, it's a massive boost to, I think, well-being as a delegate, and also that whole experience. You know, you just have a far better experience, and you know, it's a massive tick for sustainability. So yeah, huge part of it.
Thank you. Now, Jesse, I'd like to bring you in. Where have you gone on the screen? There you are. Very good. Now, Jesse, in your session, you touched on well-being, and with a view to digital events, is this kind of concern? Are people more likely to get tired during this digital event experience?
There are a couple ways in which digital events do have a different brain reaction to live in-person meetings. You've probably experienced it already. You've been on Zoom calls all day for work. You've been with clients talking about their postponed events and when they're going to occur. And at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you haven't even walked anywhere. That's because the brain goes into overdrive trying to understand visual cues that aren't as easily interpreted than they are when you're in person. So there's definitely that Zoom exhaustion that they talk about is a very real thing, as your brain tries to interpret what is not a live in-person encounter, and really work to make that encounter a beneficial one. In addition to that, your audiences will likely be even more distracted than they already are in person, because there are so many other things. Their children or their dog is talking to them. They have, you know, in addition to the phones and their other monitors that are open, their emails are popping up. You know, we just have to deal with maybe one or two devices when we are on site at a meeting or event. The amount of distractions in a digital environment are far more.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I know I've been sat here all day and I wasn't dozing off. That was nothing against your presentation. Tension here. Had to close the window as well. Okay,
if I could just add, sorry, Martin, just to that, I was just going to say, I think and I totally agree with everything with what Jesse was saying, but I think some events actually do lend themselves better to a virtual environment. You know, I think if I'm thinking about training, if I'm thinking about disseminating information, actually being able to zone in and, you know, just be in my laptop and not be distracted by, oh, you know, what we're having for lunch and, you know, what's someone doing or talking about over there. You know, I think there are certain situations where actually a hybrid or a virtual event actually lends itself better than meeting face to face. I don't know what other people think about that, but
I agree. And if I could, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say we were already going there before the crisis. We were really, because of sustainability and because of costs, we were already putting a new lens on our meetings and events, and we were already asking ourselves, is it necessary for us to bring people together in person? If this is a one-way conversation where an executive or a subject matter expert is simply delivering information, do we need to have an in-person experience for that? And do we need to redesign in-person experiences to capitalize on why we've brought people together to meet? And so I'm ready for the next donut if we want to tackle this, because I absolutely agree with you.
Yes. Do you mind if I also interject? I think there is a point that we should be making. You know, when I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's not, whose first language is not English. And let's suppose you are going to a physical event, a physical conference in English, held in English. Yeah, you're very happy. You're not totally proficient, but you know, you're still enjoying the location. You're still meeting your friends. You're still having coffee breaks. You're still getting some of the gist of the presentations by simply looking at the slides, the charts. You hear the rest of the audience laughing and you laugh with them. You're part of a situation. When you move these events online, this doesn't exist anymore. And what's really grappling is only the content of what, you know, of the event. And the other day, I was reading a report which was very interesting to me. They were saying that there is a conversion rate between 80 and 90%. You know, a conversion rate is the rate between those who register for an online event and those who then attend. And 80 to 90% is massive. Usually for physical event, you will confirm this, is much lower. I think it's roughly between 50 and 60%.
Yeah.
Well, so it's, one would be surprised, positively surprised. But then after a few minutes of the online event, the dropout rate is huge. People just drop out. And there are many explanations, and I'm sure you have your own, but I have my own. And it goes back to what Jessie was saying before. She was mentioning the attendees' cognitive overload, which is so important. If you're not native in the language the conference is being held, you get tired. You really get tired. And this has been proved by many other studies, you know, on e-learning settings where students get lower grades if they're not speaking if their mother tongue is not the language used during the e-classes. And then there is another thing I would like to mention. Of course, you as professional conference organizers, you organize your events to monetize on the audience. The bigger the audience, the more money you can get out of it. I suppose that's the main reason for holding meetings. So of course, again, this takes me back to what I was saying before. If you can reach out to more people, you know, by diversifying the languages you're offering the event, you have a broader audience, more money to get out of it. But at the same time, there is another study which was run some years ago, which proves, for example, that websites that are in the same language of the target customers sell more. They have a higher purchasing rate than, compared to websites that are in English only. So again, I know that we shouldn't, take one example and bring it to a completely different area. But I think there is some truth in it also in the event industry.
Absolutely. I want to get to the audience questions in a few moments. So I want to put one out there, and I think you've touched on something really important there, Raffaella. Mm-hmm. Do we think that when people are able to learn and the content, they learn better if the content's in their own language? But how important is it going to be organisers? So Danielle and Jessie, I'm going to ask you, how important is it for the organisers to ensure that content through the correct language is delivered to high quality? You can't just get away with a cheap app, can you? You need a quality means of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I touched on in my presentation, how we go about this, whether it's online or offline, it's focusing on that high tech, high value production. People have a certain expectation now that, like you said, it's not just flicking a switch and, here we are, we're online, we're running an event, you've got a webcam at the back, and it's all a bit slapdash. It has to be designed thoroughly in line with the customer journey, thinking about, okay, what do I want to see as a delegate attending from home, and what do I want to see as a delegate there in person, and building in that language capability professionally. And investing in decent tech is absolutely paramount to that, because as Raffaella said, as soon as people are that's not working, or it's not, there are glitches to it, people are going to drop off, and trying to get those people back is going to be is a real struggle. So absolutely investing in the right tech and doing it properly, which I think lends itself well to the whole quality versus quantity argument, in the fact that do less events, but just make sure you're doing them really, really well.
Anyone else got anything to add to that?
She said it.
Great. Okay, I'm going to now jump over to the audience questions. So our panel don't know what they are. The first one, oh my goodness me, 76 likes. In fact, the first two basically ask the same question. So Andy Gillies and Barbara have asked essentially the same one. So Andy Gillies, he writes, what could or can interpreters, either individually or collectively, do better to engage with the mice industry? Now, I've got my own view on that, but I'm going to chuck that to Jessie first, please. Jessie, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So my first thought is that you go where your clients are. So I would recommend, whether that's through industry associations, events like Confex, IMEX, IBTM, go and interact. Once we're live again with events, go to where your clients are. So making sure that you're having social experiences, chapter experiences. Hopefully our relationship with AIIC continues, and MPI and AIIC help to create those connections together. But ultimately, I'd say go have conversations with, go to their education sessions, go to have spaces at these big shows, and just visit with your clients.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. And, from my experience as a journalist in this field, there are multiple different levels and multiple different layers to the events industry. And there are some which are louder than others. And it sounds a bit brash, perhaps, but you do need to show off your services, tell the industry what you do, and that can be through so many different means. Using LinkedIn to connect with event organizers is such an easy way to start, and I'm sure AIIC as well has multiple different channels. They're organizing this event here today and inviting us along. That's a great way to get everyone else on board. As an individual, why don't you blog? Start a blog. It can be done for free. Get your thoughts out there onto the internet, because the event organizers, they are busy people. They don't know everything, despite them. They'll tell you they do, but they need to know. They need to have your services and your expertise dangled in front of their face. They don't know they need you yet. So make sure you're loud about your services.
I think what we really have to do, sorry, Danielle, I'll say this, is that we really have to make sure that the MICE industry understands that we have to work together, because we are serving the very same customers. And if each of us, if we do our job well as interpreters, you will shine, and vice versa, if you set the conference the way it should. And this would bring us to the virtual studios topic, which is a huge one. And I think as interpreters and as an association, we should do something to have a voice there, because we have to make sure that those virtual studios are designed the way we want them to be able to provide a good quality service. Sorry, Daniela, I thought.
Yeah, no, all I was going to say was, absolutely, I think there are so many parallels between, what you were discussing for interpreters and for us, in terms of what's important, what makes a good event. It is absolutely paramount to having you guys on board. So for me, I think, it's very much about building that into the design and the strategy of your event, in the same way that health and safety is paramount. And obviously those new guidelines are adding a level of complexity to that, but build that in as a standard. And so, almost when we're looking at our event checklist and we're thinking about, okay, all the different things that we need to do, and actually building in that language, accessibility, and having that interpreter function will be key to that. So I think, definitely building it into strategy and your planning from the off.
I've just seen a comment pop up on social media from actually former Conference News columnist Rob Davidson, no less, and said we need to invite more interpreters. I nearly made the title sin there. Interpreters invite them to speak at MICE events, and he's absolutely right. But my message to you would be events like International Confex and IMEX and IBTM, they put a call out for speakers. Anyone can nominate themselves to speak, put themselves forward. Do that. Put yourself forward to speak.
Yes,
why not?
Thank you. That's a great piece of advice.
There's so many questions here. I don't know where to turn next. Danielle, I'm going to come to you. And Jessie, I think your input in this might be useful too. From Monica, and it reads, there's a lot of talk about hybrid events. Can you actually explain what they are? So what will they become more common? We know that. I think what we're getting at is it's not just live streaming your session, is it? Can you give us some examples of what a hybrid components look like? Daniela, we'll start with you, and then Jessie will bring you in afterwards.
Yeah, totally. So for me, in a nutshell, a hybrid event is, firstly, is sort of the best of both worlds. And I think back to, helping with that well-being element is allowing people to engage at a level that they feel comfortable with. So if they want to be there physically in person, they can. And if, they're not comfortable doing that, or it's an international event and they want to join, they're able to join on a digital or a virtual basis. But absolutely, it isn't just a case of live streaming. It's a case of creating an environment online. There are additional benefits. I always like to think about it, if you're watching the Oscars or you're watching the BAFTAs, and you get that sort of the backstage tour, backstage access. So there's additional information on, in the virtual experience that you wouldn't get physically, and vice versa. So for me, it's about the best of both worlds, but both have to be created together, but also designed in their own entirety to maximize, I think, that engagement and that whole customer experience, whether you're in person or whether you're joining in a digital environment.
I think Deacon, in the some of you may have been able to see his comment, said it perfectly. A hybrid event is a bit of a misnomer to me. It is an opportunity for a digital audience to experience a live in-person event, but truly from the organizer side, it means that the organizer is basically organizing two different but parallel events, where sometimes there are intersections, and so you have a digital audience and then you have an in-person audience. Sometimes there's only one in-person audience. Sometimes you may have pods or hubs. I've heard it called two different ways, pods or hubs, and that would be, for example, regional events. And those regional events connect to one another, have some shared experiences, but also have some separate experiences as well. For your hybrid event, you may have a studio, for example, that broadcasts or streams out a variety of different pod or hub events that are happening to those in-person audiences, but also some people who are coming in digitally. So there are a lot of different components to a hybrid experience. Ultimately, it's bringing digital and live audiences together.
Can I
Raffaella, please.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I mean, the next future will be this one, the pod. I've never heard that word before, but the virtual studios are the virtual hubs. And I think we really have to engage in a conversation with the MICE industry about that, because if this happens, if the new world is moving towards virtual events, we have to make sure that interpreters are regarded as a key component of the in-situ crew. Because, as interpreters, we need to be able to speak to the speakers before the meeting starts. We have to get the reaction of the audience to the way we are translating things. If the speaker crack a joke and nobody's laughing, we have to get to understand that, and we have to change our way of translating depending on the reaction of the audience. We have to be able there to speak about specific terminology. We have to be regarded as a key component of the in-situ crew. So, but as Martin said before, nobody's going to knock at our door. We have to do it ourselves. We have to knock at your doors, and so I know there is a lot to do in the coming years.
So, and that I'm going to chuck in one more question before we wrap up, and it's come from Tony Rosado, and again, he asks, can the MICE industry keep us, i.e., the interpreting community, updated on the short and long-term forecast over COVID-19? So, from my perspective, as the editor of a magazine, I have conference news, but that's very UK-centric. One of our other magazine titles is Conference and Meetings World. You can find that online. That is where you'll find a lot of updated information. But then we now can bring Jessie in, because she's part of MPI, one of the global associations for the industry. It would be very advisable for you guys to follow MPI. Jessie, could you just run through the MPI purpose?
Absolutely. So we have currently, related to this crisis, we have a coronavirus dialogue resources page that has all kinds of tools related to the current crisis, but also has a recovery index and information there. That's free to everyone. You don't have to be a member of MPI to access it. It's a great place to find up-to-the-minute resources and data on the recovery as it comes. And also, of course, we have newsletters that we have as well that we can share with you that are for everyone.
Great. So obviously there's so many questions, guys, and we're absolutely delighted to receive so many, and we can't answer them all. You can find me on LinkedIn, Martin Fullard, search for that, connect with me. If you want to ask me any of your questions, I'd happily oblige. I'm not going to speak on behalf of my fellow panelists, but I'm going to give them the opportunity to extend the same privilege now if they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You can look Jesse States.
And we'll happily try and field your questions, guys. And I guess now we'll pass back to Rafaela. Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, Danielle, Jesse. It's been a pleasure. And I hope this won't be the last time we meet. I mean, it has been the first time, but maybe, hopefully not the last one. I want to thank everyone for watching us today live. There will be a recording of this event. So those of you who, I mean, the people who couldn't make it today will be able to watch this at a later stage. So thank you very much again, and I hope we will have time for another donut in a month. And so just follow our our social media. Bye bye, everyone.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.